I would put music and some audio cues in this intro, but I don't have any. Sorry.
Go on without me.
Huh?
I shall stay. I must endeavor to locate my lord forthwith.
What?
Through all these years of watching anime, it's easy to stumble into the same song and dance as each season passes through the station of monotonous panty shots and assloads of sheer, edgy, melodramatic bullshit. Not that both are automatically bad, it's that, and let's face it, a majority of animes are outright junk, whether it's to sell some home video copies that aren't guaranteed to sell, lead to merchandise that'll collect dust on someone's shelf, or have something interesting about them only to throw the baby out with the bathwater and let it starve. But you know what? I've come to terms with that. Fine. Those shows exist, as much as I despise some of them. But for every 5 animes of varying degrees of candy-colored hair, there is to be 1 or maybe even 2 gems waiting in the rough patches, ranging from full-on unexpected surprises, guilty pleasures, technical masterpieces, and simply being good enough. But then there's those shows. Animes that look interesting, sound interesting upon reading what they're supposed to be about, and getting exactly what you paid for, much to your enjoyment. But few shows have managed to fit this mold quite like Noragami, a shonen supernatural action-adventure adapted from the manga of the same name. Right from its mixture of spiritual and urban sensibilities, the series expresses how our world can make for an interesting template for how to tell a relatable, yet fantastical story about gods, evil spirits, and the crisis of existing, and flips a mirror in a way that seems natural. It's an anime where the tin is true to what's inside, and though it may not provide an experience entirely in depth, it knows when enough is enough within its fantasy. In Noragami, you have our emissary protagonist, Hiyori Iki, a seemingly straightforward high school girl who manages to pull through with being instantly compelling thanks to her quirk of secretly being a martial arts fangirl. But as she's walking with her friends, she comes across a tracksuit wearing stranger named Yato, who is nearly run over by a bus before Hiyori pushes him out of the way and is killed. Or is she? Nope, instead, Hiyori's soul leaves her body upon impact, adding questions to the fire. As it turns out, Yato isn't merely some dude in a tracksuit, but a war god turned homeless, poverty-stricken, freeloading bum god who does various jobs for chump change so that he can one day make it big, whether it's to find lost cats or to fight evil spirits known as phantoms using a shinki, spirits that can turn into an object or weapon such as swords, guns, or even animals. Hiyori initially disbelieves him, but comes to find it to be true as she can now separate from her body either at will or accidentally. It's here where we learn about the near shore and the far shore, the former being the world of the living and the latter being the world of gods and spirits. As a half-phantom, she now belongs to neither in a complete fashion, signified by the tail that links her soul to her body, which makes her a target in more ways than one, but also allows her to become acquainted with a world she never knew existed, with people she never knew she'd be friendly towards. The cast is later rounded out with Yukine, a younger teenage boy who died and becomes Yato Shinki, much to the conflict it brings, Tenjin, a wealthy god of academics who is the subject of Yato's envy, Kofuku, an energetic god of poverty who lives alongside Daikoku, her fan Shinki, as well as other characters of either shaky or hostile intent, whether it's Bishamon, another war god with a grudge against Yato, and Nora, an enigmatic stray Shinki who haunts Yato at any chance she gets and serves as an overarching antagonist. Now familiar with the living and the spiritual, Hiyori spares a coin and gives Yato a request to fix her situation and become normal again, which isn't guaranteed seeing as how it's now a matter of whether or not he'll be able to do so. The ups and downs, conflict, intrigue, revelations, and phantom slaying action begins as Noragami ignites into full gear, and the story, though structured into arcs, is one that's made coherent with carefully developed in-depth world building. The rules and explanations of these rules can be quite clever, notably the explanation regarding how regular humans can or can't see our otherworldly protagonists. With its blend of modern supernatural fantasy and mysticism, action, and welcome pepperings of comedy, right from getting to know Yato's occupation in contrast to the other gods who have attained their own following, it becomes immediately apparent that the societal system the gods abide by are somewhat modeled after our own. There's a class system revolving around one's wealth and amount of worshippers, each shrine is kinda like a business branch, and Shinkis are servants who are meant to respect and come to their respective gods' beck and call, with Yato being the equivalent of a hobo who can barely take care of Yukine to begin with. The show manages to add this bit of social commentary through this direction of how the gods and Shinkis work, with the more questionable subtext offset by the fact that Yato is an optimistic character in nature. He's just out there, working hard, making the dough, building himself his own path to making it big. With his optimism, to his tendency of being a tad bumbling, to the grand delusions his optimism brings, to how he knows when it's time to get serious, it says a lot that even when he tries to freeload, he still manages to be a lovable scumbag through the fact that he cares about people. And really, he and the rest of the cast are what anchor the heart and tone of Noragami. From Hiyori being a caring, lighthearted, and somewhat quirky protagonist who does occasionally display her true strength of character, to some of Yato's enemies or supposed rivals, revealing themselves not as one-dimensional dickbags, but either have solid reasons for harboring hatred or hold some sense of empathy. And though the anime does handle some mature themes, it's never a dark and edgy and overly dramatic anime. It knows when to sit back and let the action fly high, when to poke some fun and personality from the cast, when to ground itself into their more personal feelings or let visual storytelling do the talking, which is beneficial to the fantastical element of it all. It really does an excellent job of providing levity in all the right spots. The comedic set pieces are a blast, and all the setups, punchlines, and banter in between are a testament to the chemistry and wit in the writing. Hiyori's love for martial arts not only makes her capable enough to handle a fight, but makes for some of her most amusing moments. The fact that Yato can easily be scammed of his small savings complements his already likable, clumsy persona he uses to mask his more serious side, and Yukine is a reliable source of humorous critiques against his master's inflated ego. Sure, it never reaches the same amount of character-driven chemistry like, say, Steins Gate, but for the most part, the series balances out naturally, and I never felt like something was being forced down my throat. And the presence of action sequences, while not the most impressive effort by Bones, brings out the flair and excitement. It's stylish and well-directed in framing and pace, even if the overall quality of the visual presentation can fluctuate. But it's obvious action wasn't meant to be Noragami's main draw as much as it wants to engage in the everyday life of a god and his sword, dealing damage to phantoms who would desecrate his land, saving souls, fulfilling wishes, making shit money, and freeloading whenever possible while just being enough of a goofball to avoid being reprehensible. It's a good time when it counts, but that's only half of the story, because Noragami can actually deal in some hefty food for thought. Even though it balances it out with fun, its full strength lies in moments that are less comedic and action-packed, but emphasize the drama or the melancholy surrounding the show's core themes, where it questions the value of being a god or a spirit, or how bad deeds from the past can leave seemingly unforgivable stains that affects the future, or how one's true nature has a way of haunting you in ways that you might not be able to ignore. What some other anime would passively address as something on the side, Noragami actively explores its world and the ramifications of being a wandering and corruptible spiritual existence and how lonely it would be. Yukine feels the full force of this in his arc, where he has the spirit equivalent of an existential crisis, whose morality and sense of self are both tossed into heavy doubt when his human desires cloud his responsibility when so much is weighed on his shoulders, which negatively affects the others emotionally, spiritually, and in a way, physically. But it can also be said that Yato's motivation for great success could be seen as a dilemma to validate his own current existence, which isn't all that different from us, except he's a god, and gods exist because we make them exist, so in a way, he might have it worse. Considering his past of bloodshed, it goes to show how many cans of worms he truly has under the hood, where even if he is capable of caring about people, his true nature isn't too far behind. Maybe being a spirit entity who is technically dead isn't so peaceful knowing you are disconnected from a larger world and can be easily forgotten or ignored. How lonely being a god must be when you have to be known and worshipped in order to exist to begin with and are probably tied to whatever you're meant to be. Yato tries to avoid his true nature as a war god, which, okay, that's that's all fine and good, but what if Hiyori really does forget him? How painful would that be, seeing as how she's a friend of his? It goes to show how characterization really can impact the tangibility of subject matters with our main cast and their own fears, motivations, and problems. Even the supporting characters have something that gives them an added dimension, either through pre-established means or goals that are, for the most part, understandable within proper context. The setting of Noragami just feels so fleshed out and alive, even if what we are given is clearly just a part of it. It's at its best when it utilizes the supernatural aspect, not only for action purposes, but for story reasons. Being ambiguous to outright tragic when you know that little girl isn't gonna see her mother again because she's dead and doesn't know it. It's some fairly hard stuff, but the humor and characterizations are enough to soften all the blows. That said, I do have a few issues, but I've come to find it hard to discover any that are truly damaging. Or actually, maybe one does, but even so, it's not that damaging. Running in at 12 episodes, the length is both a blessing and a curse in that it can't spend time on a ton of useless padding, but it also has to make a compromise with the amount of story it adapts, typical of plenty of adaptations. Which is where Rabo comes into picture to be the antagonist thrown in to bite Yato in the ass, who I've read is actually an original villain made for the anime adaptation and a manga special. In fact, the last 3 episodes are original, which explains a lot as to why I don't take him as seriously compared to the rest of the story. Rabo certainly feels like a made-for-anime antagonist. He's hinted halfway in and doesn't do shit until episode 10, making his presence a tad underwhelming. Granted, he's at least given some level of depth as to why he's a cock, which is more than I can say for other villains of his kind, but it doesn't really amount to a whole lot when you know his motivation. He ultimately comes off as an addition needed to make a climactic, action-packed ending without feeling like an incomplete transition into the next story arc, a story arc that the second season is currently adapting. Well, at least he makes for a fairly awesome final battle that takes up most of the final episode, because after that business is over, Noragami simply leaves any remaining plot threads behind and ends, which again, does get fixed with the recent arrival of a second season. So really, any gripes I have aren't exactly detrimental to my overall experience. It just kinda bothered me that it required a year of waiting for a new season just to fix one of them. It's not ideal, but it doesn't crumble what is still a very solid anime with a whole lot of energy, a whole lot of hilarity, and pulls it off without succumbing to many blatant shortcuts that would make any other anime a mindless slog. The conflicts require actual effort from the characters to resolve and learn something from. The stakes can get high, knowing our protagonists aren't invincible, and the twists and turns it takes can be quite impactful indeed. Rewatching it, I realized how many ways Noragami could have fallen apart. It could have descended into a straight up ecchi. Yato could have been this extremely underwritten idiot of Ichika Urimura proportions and have little to no redeeming values. The supporting characters could have been dried up of all their additional nuances. The theme of existential insignificance and loneliness could have been downplayed and no one would learn anything. It could have been all of that. It could have played it safe as it went on. I know because I've seen it. So knowing the show stuck to its guns like it did rejuvenated my appreciation for even the little moments that turns a good scene into a great one. And while Noragami isn't one of my top 10 favorites, if scaling it based on the consideration for its character-driven narrative, the tactility it brings to world building, and the sheer knowledge of knowing which direction to take itself, nearly everything in this anime stacks pretty high, even if Rabo was kinda made to be there. Suffice to say, I'm so glad this was able to get a continuation. It may not be everyone's favorite, but I dare call this one a golden egg. This is a spiritual action-adventure drama that should be experienced from here to the far shore.